Hello, I'm Dr. Ala, camera designer. Welcome to Discrete-event simulation. This is Lecture 16, Modeling Detailed Operations. I will talk about how to define new output statistics and about operational measures. In this lecture, I will modify model 5.2 into another model 5.3, overall call center statistics. So the setup for this will include developing overall operational cost measure, and this cost measure will consist of two cost categories. And as you think about it, they're complementary, and there is also often a trade-off between those two. So we're going to consider staffing and resource cost versus cost of poor service. So, of course, if we increase the number of resources available and staffing, we could improve the service, but we want to also take into account the costs of the staffing and resources versus the poor service costs. And so we're going to develop these overall measure of service, which will include percentage of the calls rejected, and we also will add options so that we can increase staffing and improve the service through increased staffing. So we're going to make 5 replications and we'll focus on weekly costs. And because our replications are independent identically distributed, it will not allow us to carry over back office research to the next day. So now let's talk about more details on how we're going to do that. So again, in the resource data module, we already entered some hourly costs for some of the people, and we also need to add, make sure that we added those for some other resources. So we need to check whether we entered $20 per hour salary cost for the sales staffers. And as you remember, we already introduced this cost that varies from $18 per hour, or $20 or $22 per hour for each tech support person, depending on their skill. And so these salary costs, they're paid when on duty, whether busy or idle, it doesn't matter. And so if we sum those up, then together these costs would be $12,820 per week. And if you want to check, you can see more details in the ARENA textbook on how to compute that. And so we view all of this existing staff as fixed, but we also want some modification. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be able to increase the number of staff. So let me go ahead and first of all make sure that the costs are included in our ARENA model, and also rename our model from 5.2 to 5.3. So here I opened ARENA and I have my model 5.2 that we finished in the previous lecture also open in ARENA. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And so I'm going to save it as model 5.3. And I'm going to start working on this model to change the 5.2 that I have right now into 5.3. So the first thing, as I mentioned, I want to do is check the resource costing. So resource module is located in the basic process, and it's a data module. So here you can see this is a resource module, and so you can see that we have some of the costs are already defined. So here we have the cost for the salespeople, but we do not have, for tech people, but we do not have the cost for sales yet. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the $20 per hour cost for busy and for idle also. And so that takes care of the cost. So for the rest of it, we already have the cost. So let's review what other changes we're gonna make. So here, we're also gonna increase sales staff between noon and 4 p.m. So quick question, why would we need to do that? Well, if you remember in model 5.2, when we ran our model and observed the reports, in the report it was clear that we had during certain periods, because we collected the statistics on the work, on the work done during different periods, and the number of rejected calls during those periods. So when we looked at the number of calls during different rejected calls during different periods, we saw that we lose a lot of calls during periods 5 through 8. And so it corresponds actually to the hours from noon to 4 p.m. because our simulation starts at 8 a.m. And so the first 4 hours, 8, 9, 10, and 11, we're okay. And then during hours 5 and 8, which are the next 4 hours, so it's noon, 1, 2, and 3. So between noon and 4 p.m., we want to increase our staff, and specifically we're going to increase the sales staff and also the tech staff. So to increase the sales staff, at noon, we're going to define a variable called new sales, and that will represent the number of new sales staff. And so we're going to also assume that each new salesperson that works during noon to 4 p.m., the part-time salesperson, gets $17 per hour, works 4 hours per day, 5 days per week. And so when we multiply all of that together, so 17 by 4 by 5, or 17 by 20, you're going to get $340 per week for each additional sales staff. So that's a value that we're going to use later when we compute those operational measures. And so another thing that we need to do is we need to change the schedule for the new sales, for the salespeople to incorporate the new sales. So as you remember, the schedule for sales, right? The sales resource we already have, and we have sales schedule. And so that schedule is already defined, so we just need to do some changes during hours from noon to 4 p.m. And because we're going to do that using the variable, we can't really do that using graphical editor. So instead, we're going to be using dialog, and I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and make some changes. And so the resource sales itself, we don't really need to do any more changes. We already increased the costs, so we should be fine. So let's go ahead and do the changes. So the first thing I want to do here in my model to do the changes for the to add the new salespeople is introduce the variable new sales. So the variable module is a data module from the basic process. So here I'm in the basic process. Here's my variable module. So I'm going to add this variable called new sales. And so this is just a single variable, and we could, if you wanted to, we could have initial value, but by default it's 0 anyways. As you can see, right, that's by default, so we're fine with new sales being 0. So now that we define this variable, the next thing I'm going to do is go to the schedule data module, which is also in the basic process. So I'm clicking on schedule data module. And I need to find my sales schedule. So here's my sales schedule. Notice, right, it's of course a capacity type schedule, And more importantly, the time units in half hours. So I need to keep that in mind when I do that. If I clicked right here, double-clicked right here, that would take me to the graphical editor. However, I cannot use the variable that I just defined through the graphical editor. Therefore, instead of doing that, I'm gonna use the editing via editor. So I'm gonna double-click here on the sales schedule and have this open for me where I can do some changes. So the first thing to notice right again is half hours. So the first 4 hours we're gonna leave as it is. So here we have half hours, so this is the first hour. Then this is the next hour. Then here we actually have an hour and a half. So altogether here, first, second, and this is 3.5 hours. So here, this is the next hour, so it will take us to 4.5. So we actually need to do some changes, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this 2.5 hours into 5 and 1, which would remain and would take the 2, 2, 3, and 1 together would be 8 half hours or 4 hours. And then remaining 5 and 1, right, because it's 5 and 2 corresponds to value of capacity 5 and then 2 as a duration. So I need to split it. And so I'm going to split the 2 into 1 and 1. So I'm just going to cancel this for now, and I'm going to add another one where I have 5 for capacity and value of 1. So now I have 5 and 1. So as I said, up to this blue part or blue line, I have exactly 4 hours here in terms of duration. And so this one I'm going to edit, so I can either double click or click edit. So double clicking on it, I'm going to change this to 1, but I also need the variable. So easy way for me to do would be either go back to variable and then copy it, or even better, I can just build the expression. So I'm going to build the expression, so I'm adding to 1, I'm going to add a variable. So variables are found under the basic process variables. So I'll click on basic process variables, then go to the variable, which is at the end, very end. Then click on variable and then click on current value. And then here, it turns out, right, that by, as always, it's listed alphabetically. So new sales is right there right away. So I'm going to use new sales here. So good, now I have my new sales. Then I do OK. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding new sales for the next 4 hours. So I need to determine whether I'm adding it, right? So this is a half hours and another 2 half hours. That says 1.5 hours, right? So of course I'm going to add it here. So I'm going to go ahead, do the changes again, build expression, then basic process, variable, current value, new sales. And so I should have 2 plus new sales, of course, right? So I'm adding it to the, I made a mistake. I gotta go and change it. So let me cancel this. I added new sales in the wrong, right, into the wrong value, which is, this can easily happen, right? So I added new sales to the duration, but new sales is a variable that represents additional capacity. So of course, I just need to cut it out from here. Well, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to add it here. So now I have 5 plus new sales, because 5 is a capacity, new sales is a capacity. And so again, similar thing I'm going to do with this. So I'm going to add additional capacity through build expression, then I click off, then I have a plus, then basic process variable, current value, new sales. So that adds my new sales there. And so I have 1 and 2, 3 half hours, which is 1.5 hour. And then here I have another 3, which is another 1.5 hours. So that would take me to 3. And then this one I will have to break. So I'm gonna go here again, add the capacity of new sales. So I click off plus, then in under basic process variables I select variable, current value, and then new sales, of course. And I have 5 plus new sales, and then OK. And then, right, as I mentioned, this needs to be split up. So what we're gonna have is we're gonna have part of it added to the previous. So we have 1 and 2 and 3, right? That's 6 half hours or 3 hours. So I need an additional hour. So here I have 1.5 hours. So an hour means 2 half hours. So I'm gonna split this. So I'm gonna add another one and have the capacity where I have 6 plus, and under basic process variable, variable current value, and then new sales, and then duration 2. And so I'm taking out the 2 out of this 3. So the 3 should be changed to 1, because altogether I still want the duration to add up to 3 here. So I added that, then I go here and double click on this and change the duration to 1. And now, right, I split it into 6 plus new sales for the hour, and then 6 for a half an hour. And so the rest remains the same as it was. And so we're done changing the sales schedule. And so the next thing we're gonna do is increase tech support staff from noon to 4 p.m., right? Because the tech support staff is also highly utilized. So we're gonna, again, similarly as before, we're gonna define variables to do that. But because the tech support staff is different, right, we need to have different variables, right, because they're different products. So we can hire people for a specific product, or we can hire people that can do all 3 products, 1, 2, and 3. And so we're going to introduce variables new tech 1, new tech 2, and new tech 3, and also a variable new tech all. And again, these are the numbers of new tech support people that we're going to hire that are qualified similarly to how they're named. And so the assumption is that the costing is going to be $16 per hour for each 1 product staff person and $18 per hour for each all product staff, tech staff person. And so when we look at this, for the 1 product staff people, we're going to get $320 per week, right? Because again, we have 4-hour day for those people and then 5 days. So together, 4 by 5 is 20. So then 20 by 16 is 320 per week. And similarly, right, 18 by 4 by 5 is going to give us 360 per week for each all product staff person. And so we'll use that information later when we define the overall operational costs. So similar as before, we're going to have to define new entries. And actually, in this case, right, we're not going to add it to the specific schedule person, but instead we're going to add new entries in the resource data module. So we're going to have Larry that will do product 1, Mo that will do product 2, Curly is going to be additional, will represent additional staff that will do product 3, and then Herman will do for, you do all 3 products. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to go to variable data module and add 4 additional variables. And so this is going to be a variable called new tech 1. And this is going to be new tech 2. And this is going to be new tech 3. And then this one is going to be new tech all. Again, these are just variables. Let me rename this. All right, so again, these are the variables. By default, they're gonna have zeros, and so the next thing we're gonna do is, like we did before, we need to change the schedule. But before we can do that, we need to introduce additional resources representing these additional hires. So I'm gonna go ahead and temporarily move this up so it's easier for me to add additional people. So I'm gonna add here resource, and I name this resource, as I mentioned, Larry. And Larry is gonna again be based on capacity, based on schedule, because we want to have schedule. Here we're gonna have Larry schedule, and we're gonna keep it as weight, right? Not to carry over. We're gonna have a schedule rule. Well, actually, we're gonna have the schedule rule weight because we don't really need to worry about carrying those over. Just like with sales, with the additional salespeople, we don't worry about that. But Larry, right, and the rest of them, which I'm talking about Mo, Curly, and Herman, they're only going to be working noon to 4 p.m., so we don't need to worry about them being carried or kept too long. So weight is going to be the correct schedule rule here. And then in terms of the pay, it's going to be $16 per hour, whether busy or idle. And so we're good, right? And now if I were to go to schedule, now I see here added Larry schedule, right? So automatically as I add Larry and specify that it's based on schedule and type in Larry schedule, it also creates a schedule here. So let me do a few more of these resources, right? So the next person is Mo, again based on schedule. And then here I have Mo schedule. And of course, if I go here, now I have additional Mo schedule right after Larry. And so I can be adding those one by one. So just gonna create several Mo's, but then I'm gonna rename things properly, right? So instead of Mo, the third person is Curly, so I'm gonna rename it as Curly. And more importantly, I need to change this to be Curly schedule. And then I'm good here, right, for Curly. And I also get the Curly schedule here in the schedule data module. And last but not least, I need the person that can do all four or all three products, and that's Herman. And very importantly, I need to change this to Herman schedule. So now, right, I still need to do the cost. So let me do the cost here. I forgot to change the cost for Mo, and so I didn't change the cost for Curly either because of that. It was just the same as Mo's. So these three, Larry, Mo, and Curly, they can only do products, single products, right? But Herman can do multiple products, and therefore, as I mentioned, right, we have $18 per hour for Herman. So now that we got this, right, we actually don't really have any schedules there created, right? The schedules are created, but they're not. So you see the new schedules, Larry, Mo, Curly, and Herman. These schedules are just empty. They have 0 rows. So if we double click here, it just gets us into a graphical editor. But in the graphical editor, I cannot use my variables. What I want to do is I want to be able to use these new tech 1, new tech 2, new tech 3, and new tech all variables in those schedules. And therefore, I'm going to double click here and use editing via edit dialog. So I'm going to double click on Larry. Here's my dialog, and I'm going to change this to half hours, of course, because the rest of it is done this way. And then the next thing, I'm going to indicate the duration. So for the first 4 hours, Larry isn't working. Larry only comes to work to start at 12. And so we're going to have capacity 0 during the first 8 half hours. And 8 half hours represents those first 4 hours. And then during the next 4, right? So the next 4 hours is 8 half hours. We have the capacity actually being represented by the number of the new tech 1 people. And so we need to build the expression. And so I'm going to go here and find my variable, which is right under our basic process variables. We have variable and then current value. And then I need to scroll down to new tech 1. And so we're going to have capacity of the new tech 1. That's going to be our capacity. So we got this, but that's only during the first 8 hours, right? The first 4, and then the noon to 4, and we still have 3 more hours, right? Because we have we have it for 11 hours, so I need to add capacity 0 because after 4, the product 1, new techs are not working. So I'm going to put 0 here as a capacity, and then my duration is going to be 6 half hours, which is 3 hours additional. And so I'm do OK, and here I'm done with this schedule. I'm gonna do the same for Mo and Curly schedule. So let me go ahead, double click on Mo, again change it to half hours, add 0 duration 8, add 1, and then duration, oh, not 1, sorry. Yeah, the capacity is going to be given by the variable, so it's going to be basic process variable's current value, and Mo represents new techs 2, so it's going to be new tech 2 as a capacity, and the duration is going to be 8, and then the rest, 3 hours, which is correspond to 6 half hours. We don't have additional techs, so it's going to be 0, 6. And so similar thing for Curly, you just follow along. So again, first 0 capacity, duration 8 half hours. Then we have capacity given by the variable, that is new tech 3, because Curly represents new tech 3 that we hire additionally, duration 8 half hours, because this is noon to 4. And then 3 more hours, we're going to have capacity of 0 during that time, and so this is 6 half hours. So we're almost done. We just need to do changes to Herman schedule, and that's very similar again, changing this to half hours as time units. Go in, indicate capacity 0 during the first 8 half hours. Then we have a capacity given by the variable, which is new tech all, and that's during the next 8 half hours. And during the last 6 half hours, we have capacity 0 because it's only working during noon to 4. So now that we got all of this done, and of course we have the resources, now we are good on introducing new stuff. And so as you saw, right, we changed the schedule data module to add capacity. We did it during using the dialog, or we could do the spreadsheet editing. And so the next thing is we need to consider that we might be able to increase number of trunk lines beyond 26. So we need to incorporate it in our costs. And we assume that $98 per week flat fee for each trunk line So we can define this expression called new resource cost. So it's going to be new res cost for all resource costs. And this is the expression that we're going to use there. So notice we calculated 340 in terms of new sales because we hired them at $17 per hour for 4 hours during 5 days a week. And then also for all of the single product tags, right, that we add them together, each of them gets $320 per week. And then new tag all, that part-time new tag all, we get 360. And that's the cost that we discussed. And then additional cost, right, for the trunk line is 98 per week. So we multiply 98 per week by the number of trunk lines scheduled. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this. So here we need to add an expression. And as you remember, expression is a data module, and it's found in advanced process. So we're gonna go to advanced process panel and click here on expression, and that gives us the expressions that we have so far. So we need to add, so double click here, we're gonna add another expression. I'm gonna rename this as new rest cost. And then I need to add the expression value. So if I just double click here, I can't really use the builder. So instead, I'm going to use the dialog. So I'm double clicking on this row. And that leads me to the dialog. And then I can just add the expression here. So when I click on add or double click here, this pops. And then here is where I can actually right click and select build expression from the drop down menu. And then use my expression builder. So what I want to do is build that expression, right? So even though, right, you have that in the book and everything, and you want to be able to use expression builder to build those when you are creating your own models. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how we can create this expression. So the first thing, as you remember, we need to use the cost for, so 340 per week is what we get from the that's the cost that we need to pay to the additional salespeople. And so the new sales was a variable that represented additional capacity. So we're going to select new sales here, right? I go to, again, under basic process variables, variable, and then current value. And then here's the new sales right away for me, right? Or I could select them here. And so next I click off here because I need to add more, right? If I didn't click off, it would erase the whole thing. So I'm gonna click off and then add plus, and then I'm gonna add all together. So I'm gonna sum up together all the values for, and then multiply them for the single product people, and then multiply them by their salary per week, right? So each of them, the tech people that serve single product get 320 per week. So that's exactly what I'm doing. 320 multiplied by all different tech people that only serve single product. So again, current value, and then select here new tech 1, and then click off and add, and then again under basic process variable current value, and then scroll down, select tech 2, and then click off, plus, and finally again current value, drop down to new tech 3, and that gives me this, right? And so that's not all yet, because I also need to add new tech all salary, right? So I'm going to add the weekly salary for each new tech person is 360, and then multiply by, again, basic process variables, variable current value, and then this new tech all represents the capacity, right? How many new tech all people we have. So I got that, so I'm going to click off here and then add finally the resource, right, the cost of trunk lines. So I'm going to add, that's going to be $98 per week, and then multiply it by the number of resources scheduled, right? The number of trunk lines that we have, capacity of the trunk lines. So to do that, I'm going to go under basic process variables, find the resource, click on the resource, then on usage, I have the current number scheduled, which is MR, but here right away it has Aiden, right, because it's all ordered by alphabet. I'm not interested in adding Aiden, right? I need to add the trunk line, right? So here, MR, trunk line. So now we're done. This is our final expression. So I'm just gonna select OK, and then OK here. And so I added this expression value for the new res cost. And this is gonna be computing my resource cost, new resources cost. So now that I got that, let's review what we need to do. So this is exactly what we've done, right? And again, this does not depend on simulation results, only on our setup. And so the next thing for us to do is to take into consideration customer dissatisfaction cost, right? Because if we don't have enough resources and a lot of people, as we see in the model 5.2, a lot of people are being dropped and rejected their calls. That's not good, but also we don't want to keep people waiting too long, right? Imagine if you call somewhere and then having to wait very, very long, you know that next time you might reconsider calling, right, or might not be happy with this. So again, we can incur costs for caller, wait, and hold past a certain threshold, right? So for the tech person, 3 minutes is okay threshold, 1 minute for sales, and 2 minutes for order status. And so beyond these thresholds, we will incur per minute costs, and these costs are going to be $0.368 for tech, 0.818 for sales, and 0.346 for order status. And so in practice, of course, you know, these costs are very difficult to estimate, but that's what we're going to use. And so to do that, to implement that, we're going to actually add 3 new assign modules to accumulate excess wait times on hold. And we also will introduce additional variables. We're going to have tech support, excess time, excess tech wait time, and also excess sales wait time, and excess status wait time. So we'll introduce these 3 variables. And for excess tech wait time, the way we're going to compute it is we're going to be adding, we're going to start it with 0, and then each time, right, we're going to add this maximum between the entity waiting time minus 3 and 0, right? And that's what it does. It just, if it's less than, right, if the waiting time is less than 3, then it's going to be negative, so it's just going to be 0 that we're going to add. But if it exceeds 3, then it's going to be positive, and so we're going to be adding that. So it's exactly the thresholding that we wanted to do. And additional thing I wanted to mention is this entity wait time is actually a built-in Arena attribute, and what it does, it holds all waiting times, including in queues so far. So luckily, right, there were none before the preceding process module, so we should be fine here using this entity .wait time. So, but you gotta be careful using it somewhere else, because it does include waiting times in queues before that, right? So it's important to take that into account. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this. So let's go ahead and define 3 new variables. And the variable module is found in basic process. So I'm going to go to basic process, then variable. And then in this data module, I'm going to double click to add additional rows. And so first I'm going to add this variable called access tag wait time. And so again, right, the access wait, right, we're gonna start with 0, and then we're gonna be increasing it. So I could just left it as it is, or add it. It really doesn't matter. So the next thing is also add access time for sales and for status. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm just adding those and editing them up appropriately. And so now I have these access tag wait time, access status wait time, and access sales wait time. So now that they are defined, these variables, I can use them. So let me go ahead and define new assigns. So to do that, let me move this back. And so after we move this back, we have more space for the model. So the first thing I'm going to do is to add some assigns. So one of the assigns is going to be for text. And this is right after we're going to assign these cost, waiting cost, right after this, right after this part where we have the tag call. Right after that, we're going to have this assign wait cost. So I'm going to move some of the modules a little closer. To leave me some more room for those additional assigns. So let me just go ahead and move all of them together. That might be easier. And let's stop and do this. So I'm just selecting all of them so I can move them all. And so I'm going to move them all a little closer here. Maybe that's a little too close. And oh well, let's just move them even closer and then try to move the rest of them further. So we have enough space. Let me also move some of these. And that gives me a little more space for some of the other modules. And so let's see if I can move some of them further, closer. Maybe not. That's close. So let's see. This should probably work. So now what I want to do is I want to add disconnect these connections and then connect it through the assign module. So I'm going to select the connections and delete them and then reconnect them with the assign. And so I'm going to add the assign here. So assign is a flowchart module from the basic process. So here I'm going to select the assign and add it. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to add my assign to the back office research decision module. Oh gosh, not so fast. Alright, assign is maybe this way a little better. And then connect, of course, my assign with the rest of the process product type 2 and type 3 modules. And now I want to add this assign, so I'm going to double click on it. And to edit this assign, I'm going to name it first, and it will be called assign access tech wait time. And very importantly, I need to add the assignment here, so I'm going to double click, or I could press add here, and then I double click, and I'm going to change my variable that I just defined. So as you know, I defined variable access tech wait time, so this is going to be my access wait time. And then I'm going to build an expression. So again, here what I'm doing is I'm going to update here where I'm building expression for a new value. I'm going to increment my access wait time that I currently have and add the thresholding expression that I showed you. So the access wait time is of course a variable, as we know, so I'm going to find variable, which is under basic process variables, variable, and then current value, and then here scroll to access tech wait time, and then I'm going to add to that, right? So I'm clicking off and then add to that, and I want to add that maximum. So the maximum is a math function. So there is math functions right here, so I'm going to click on math functions, and then I need to find maximum value, so I click on maximum value. So here's my maximum value function, right? So between those two numbers, right? So I'm going to compare it to 0. I'm going to compare the difference between the entity time and 3, right? So minus 3. This is what we're going to have. Let's just use minus here. And so what I'm going to use here is an entity-related attribute. So let's try to look for it in under entity-related variables, attributes, and then I want the entity wait time. So let's see if we have times, and then we have entity creation. So here we have entity wait time, right? So entity total wait time is entity.wait time. And as again, right, that would include all the other queues, but we don't have other ones before. So this defines our expression. So I'm saying okay, and this is okay, and then okay here. And then what I can do is I could just copy this assign module, because I also need to do a similar thing for the sales and for my order status. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm copying this just to save me some time. So I selected it, and I can left click and then say copy, or just Control Insert buttons. And to copy it in, I also need to disconnect, right? So I'm going to disconnect this to add this to sales, right? So I'm going to select this connection and delete it, like I just did. And then I want to add the assign, so let me also move this a little bit to free up some more room where to place my assign. So I'm going to go ahead and do paste then, and paste it somewhere here, for example. And of course, I need to connect it, so I'm going to click on the connection button and connect it from left to right, as we always do. And here, this just assigns the access tech wait time, and if I click on it, of course, right, the arena reminds me that names must be unique. But not only the names must be unique, we don't want to assign, change the access tech wait time variable after the sales, right? What we want to do here is we want to do the sales wait time. So not only I'm going to rename my assigns into assign excess sales wait time, but also I will change this assignment. And so I'm going to go in, and instead of variable excess tech wait time, I want to be changing the variable excess sales wait time. And so here again, right, I also need to do the changes. So I'm going to go in, build an expression, and then replace my excess wait time that I have here, right? I'm going to delete that. And instead, I'm going to do my variable excess sales wait time. And so I replace it with excess sales wait time. And then here also the threshold is different. As you remember, the threshold for sales is only 1 minute. So we're going to have -1 here, because that's our threshold, and then OK. And so now this is a sales because we're doing it for the sales process. And so we're changing the sales variable, and this is how we're going to increment it, right? We're adding whatever exceeds the threshold. And the new threshold is 1. So that's OK. As soon as we did that, that takes care of the name, but we also need to reconnect it. So I'm going to click connect, select here, and then connect it to release trunk line. So now that I did that, right, I did this connection. I'm gonna also have to do a similar thing for the sales, for the status, right? So this is the status part, and so it kind of splits up into 2 branches because we have this decide, which is a 2-way decision. So I will have to disconnect both of them. So let me move a few of these modules, just a little. To free up some of the room for my assign. To make sure I have enough room for assign. Let's see, maybe I need to move it a little more here too. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect these both branches, this branch here and this branch here, and reconnect them with the release trunk line, but through the assign. So let me go ahead and do that. So let me copy, right, I already copied this, so I'm gonna paste that copied assign somewhere, and then maybe connect them together, right? So I'm going to connect this branch with the assign, and then connect my assign with a release trunk line, and also connect my no salesperson required with assign excess wait time. And I don't quite like this, right? So I might move it just a little more too, and just maybe here. And so I'm going to control and just select all of them to just move them all together. And also move my assign somewhere here maybe. So now, right, that it looks a little better, I'm gonna double click on assign because, as you see, Arena reminds me, right, I need to change this assign. So the name is not unique, but not only that, it takes care of the wrong variable, because here we're actually dealing with a status call, right? So this is my order status call, and so I need to take care of it. So I'm going to rename this as assign excess status wait time, and importantly, I'm going to change this assignment. So I'm going to double click, or I can click edit. And then here, I'm going to change my variable that I'm assigning to assign status wait time. And then here, I'm going to change the expression. So I'm going to rebuild the expression. So I'm going to get rid of this and replace it with, again, basic process variables, variable, current value. I'm going to replace it with excess status wait time, because that's what we're changing. We're changing excess status wait time, and we're incrementing it by this, right? But the threshold is 3. That's not the correct threshold for the order status. For order status, we have a 2-minute threshold, so it should be -2. So now that we change it to status wait time, excess status wait time, right, and change to the correct threshold, we're good here. I say good here, and also good here, and that takes care of this. So we're almost ready to do some of the operational measures. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna also look at the excess wait time, and we're gonna multiply it by per minute cost, also multiply by 5. So, and this is because, right, so you remember the per minute cost that we discussed, we're going to multiply them by 5 because we want to put it on a weekly basis, because a single replication only takes care of a single day, right? So multiplying it by 5 changes it to the weekly basis cost. And so, as you remember, for tech, the per minute cost was this. So multiplied it by 5, we're going to get this for tech. Then for sales, we had this as a per minute cost. Then multiplying by 5, we're going to get this value for sales. And last but not least, this was the order status per minute cost for waiting customers. And so we're going to multiply by 5, and that gets us weekly wait hold cost for order status. And so now, as I said, we're ready to define the performance measures. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a statistic data module that is found in the advanced process. And so we're going to define this total cost as a statistic, and it's going to be an output statistic. So the output statistics are only computed at the very end of a replication. So that's very important to remember, that the output statistics are always computed only at the end of the replication. And the total cost entry, right, in the statistic data module, we're going to use an expression to compute it. And this is the expression that we will use. So here we're going to have the new resource cost, that we added up all of the new resources per weekly cost. And then we're going to have this excess sales wait time multiplied by the weekly cost of that, and excess status wait time multiplied by the weekly cost of that, and then excess tech wait time multiplied by weekly per minute cost of that. And then this is the value, right, for the current model. So current model, right, if you don't do any changes, right, just in the salary cost, we have 12,820, right, as a salary cost before we, before adding any new additional resources. So that's what we're gonna have as this total cost output statistic. And then we also will have a second statistic called percent rejected. But before I do that, let me just demonstrate the how we're gonna do the previous output statistic, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. So here I'm gonna go to we just defined those or incremented those additional wait times, and here now I'm gonna go to advanced process to find the statistic module, and in that data module I'm gonna introduce additional statistics. Right, so the statistics that I want to add here is going to be output. So we already talked about counter, time persistent. Before that we talked about tally. So now we're talking more, and frequency, of course, we talked about earlier. So now we're defining this output statistic, and I'm going to name it, just as I mentioned there, total cost. And so this is, of course, right, requires the expression, so I'm going to go ahead and do the expression, and notice the report label is total cost, just like the name, but of course I could change it if I wanted to. So here, right, I could build an expression for my total cost. So our total cost will be the new resource cost, which is the expression that we defined. So expression is not under basic process, but under advanced process variables. So advanced process, and then expression, and then value, and then here's our new resource cost. And then I click off, and then add additional cost. So the next cost I want to add is the excess waiting time cost multiplied by the corresponding values. So for the sales, the per minute weekly cost was 4.09, and so I multiply that by the excess sales waiting time, which was, as you remember, a variable, right? So I'm going to click off here, click on basic process variables, and this is where a variable is, and then current value, and then here I'm going to select excess sales waiting time, which is already by default selected, and then I'm going to add also the weekly cost for the calls on hold for status. So the per minute cost, weekly cost for status is $1.73, and so then I multiply it by the current value for the variable status wait time, excess status wait time, and then I click off and do a similar thing for my excess tech waiting time, which per minute weekly cost is $1.84, and then multiply by current value, and then excess tech wait time, and then I'm clicking off and adding that amount for salaries that we have before we added any resources. So it's 12,820, and this is the final expression. So I'm do OK, and this is my expression. So now when I'm clicking it off, this should be fine. So you can see, right, this is the expression that we have, which is quite long, right, but this is our expression. So next thing we're gonna do, and notice, right, the collection period is at the end, right? So it's grayed out here in terms of collection period because this is computed at the end. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create this other statistic. So let me describe first of how we're gonna do that. So our other statistic is percent rejected, and it's again is gonna be an output statistic. And so we're going to need to introduce this total rejected calls, because the percent rejected is going to be total number rejected divided by the number that we have attempted. So to do that, we'll need to introduce a new record module in the call arrival area, and we'll have, through that record module, we'll introduce this counter called total rejected calls. And in a way, it's very similar to what we had in model 5.1 before we modified it to model 5.2. In model 5.2, we modified it so that the rejected calls actually were comprised of all different periods, and rejected calls became a set. So we cannot name it rejected calls. We need to have a different name for it because we already have rejected calls as a set of counters in our model. And so we're going to do that a little different. So again, this is going to be an output in terms of percent rejected. And to compute it, we're going to multiply by 100 this division, right, or this fraction of the number of counts for total rejected calls counter, and versus the number of counts for the attempted calls. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that. So now, as I said, the first thing we need to do is introduce this new rejected calls, record rejected calls module. So we already have this record rejected calls, but as you can see, it's actually recording it in the counter set called rejected calls, right? So because we made the changes, but we still need to know not just per hour rejected calls, but the total number. We need to introduce a new one. So I'm gonna go ahead and move this one a little bit and then disconnect them, right? And I'm moving it to allow this additional space to add another record module, right? So after I moved it, I'm gonna now disconnect this and then add an additional record module. So I'm gonna go ahead and find the record module, which is in the basic process. And so under basic process, there's this flowchart. So let me click on this record so I can automatically connect it to my new record. And so here's my another record module. And then let me just go ahead and connect it with this one. And then I'm gonna go in and add this record module, the new one that I just did, and I can't really name it as record rejected calls, because if I just did something like this, then it reminds me that the name must be unique. So I need to rename it as total rejected calls. And this is again, right, is gonna create a counter, right? And so I need to also change this. So my counter name is gonna be total rejected calls. And so this is going to be my counter. And of course I don't want to record it in the set because I only want a single counter. And so each time the entity will pass through this, it will increment this counter total rejected calls. So now that I did that, right, and now I'm good again, now that I did that, I can use it to define a new statistic. Right, that's output statistic that we want to have. So I'm going to go back to Advanced Process panel, scroll down to the statistic module, and then in the data module statistic, I'm going to do some changes, and I'm going to add additional output statistic, and I am going to name this statistic percent rejected. So as I said, it's going to be an output, which means it only will compute it at the very end of the simulation, at the end of the replication. So I'm going to have the output for the percent rejected. And here it requires an expression, so I'm going to right-click on it and then build the expression. And then when I build the expression, I'm going to have it as a percentage, so I'm going to multiply it by 100, and then I'll have the division, right? I'm going to divide my newly introduced counter value for total rejected calls, and then divide it by the counter value of attempted calls. So the counters, right, are found in record, so I can go to record, and then counter, and then value. And then here, instead of attempted calls, I want to select total rejected calls. And then I'm going to divide that by the, again, counter, right? In record, and there's the basic process variables. I have record, counter, and then value, and then the attempted calls, right? So the total rejected calls divided by all attempted calls that we have, right? That's going to be the percentage rejected. So now that I'm done with my expression, I say OK, and when I click off, now it's fine, right? Again, the output is at the end of the replication, so this is grayed out. It automatically knows what we need to do. So now that we're pretty much done with this, right, we can go ahead and run it. But before I do that, I also want to do some changes in the setup, right? So let's review. Let me discuss the changes that we're going to introduce in setup. One of the changes is going to be the number of replications. We're going to change the number of replications, but we also need to take care of the costing. So in the setup, when we change the setup, as I said, right, in a replication parameters tab, we need to make sure that we initialize between the replications. So we're going to go to run, then setup, we select the replication parameters tab, and in the replication parameters tab, we're going to check initialize between replications. So again, right, we need to be initializing the statistics in the system, right, and you can read more information about that in the ARENA textbook. So the default is actually both, right, and that's the only way to get truly independent and identically distributed replications. So it basically destroys the overnight tech support research jobs, but to do otherwise, right, would actually complicate our model. So we're just gonna have this both default setting accepted, but be mindful about that. And so the next thing is also take care of the project parameters tab in the setup. And so we're gonna turn off all but the costing statistic collection for the speed. And then the costing is important because it's required, right, in order for us to get this entity dot wait time. And so we're gonna look at the results from 5 replications. So let me go ahead and do the changes in the setup so we can see the results. So I'm changing my setup. So I'm gonna go into run, setup, and then, as I said, under replication parameters tab, we're gonna initialize between the replications both statistics and system to get the IID replications. Right, and additional things that we want to do is also look into the project parameters. And right now, this is the statistics that were selected, but instead we want to have costing. And so we're going to be collecting the statistics on costing. And we could actually get rid of some of the other statistics, for example, for the entities and queues. And to speed the whole thing up, let's also rename this as 5.3, and then this is gonna be OK. And so now let's run it and see what we can do. So I could also do run, right, and then run control, and then a batch run, right, so no animation. And so let's just run it through the batch run. One thing that I think I forgot is to change the replication. So let's go ahead and start over. So let's start over, let's finish, and let me go back and check the setup, right? So under replication parameters, I still kept 1, which I forgot to change the number of replications. So now that we did, that should work better. So let's apply. And then OK. And then let's just run through the batch run. Oh, I didn't select the batch run. Let's check the batch run, and then just run it. So now, right, the simulation has run to completion. We can see the results. So under the category of review, right, you can also see the costs. So we can see some of the costs, right, in terms of the total cost, right? So our total cost is this much, and you can also look at the output statistics, and that's on the next page. And so you could look at these, right, and that tells us about the percent rejected. So this is our average percent rejected, and this is the total cost, right? Because we have 5 replications, I also got as a half width computed. So you can see these are, right, basically our base. So this is information for our base system. So now what we want to do is also look at a different scenario. And so if I wanted to, I could print the report. And so I'm not really gonna do that. So as you can see, we have the results for a base case where we have no additional staff added because we just left our variables at 0, which is their default value, and we still have 26 trunk lines. So this is pretty much the total cost and percent rejected, which is actually slightly different for us because we have different right, there's a variability, so we have a different kind of sequence of random numbers generated from what was generated before. So the next thing we have is the other case, and so we're gonna add 3 of each of 4 or 5 staff types, and then 3 more trunk lines. So let me go ahead and do that in the model, and then we're gonna run it again and then compare. So I closed off my report, and I'm gonna finish this replication before I can make the changes. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this as extra resources and then do some changes. So now I'm gonna do these changes by going to basic process, and I'm gonna go first to resource and add additional 3 trunk lines. So my capacity was 26. Now 26 plus 3 is 29, so my capacity is gonna be 29. So I just changed it to 29. And then I'm also gonna do that additional resources for the new tech people and the new sales people through variable data module. So I'm clicking on variable module in basic process, and then here, right, when I click on new tag 1, it just was 0, right? So I'm going to change it to, and that's the default value, so even if I don't have any initial values, it just starts with as a 0. And so I'm going to add 3 here, and then I'm going to double click here on the new tag 2 and put 3 here, and also double click on new tag 3 and put 3 here. And last but not least, new tag all, I'm gonna click here and add 3. And so let's now see, right, so let me save this again, and let me see what's gonna happen when we run this, right? So the only changes I just made is I added this additional capacity for new technical sales and also trunk line. So let's go ahead and run it to see, right? So again, we are running it through the batch. so it's very fast. So we're gonna see the results right away. It ran to completion. So you can see right now we have larger total cost. So let's see what else happened in terms of the outputs. So we're looking at the outputs, and again that's on the next page. I'm gonna scroll back up to see this, and so you can see that percent rejected actually was reduced, but the total cost is increased. Again, because we have 5 replications, we actually calculated the half width. So as you see, when we added these additional staff, right, the total cost increased. And again, this is slightly different than what we got, but the percent rejected decreased, and again, a little quite different there as well. So it's really should improve, right, our percent rejected, but increase the costs. So the question, right, which is better? So I think there's a little mistype here in terms of percent rejected, but overall you can see the trade-off between the total cost and the percent rejected, and so you can't really definitely say which is better unless we looked at, you know, some kind of function that combines those two, right? But there's a definite trade-off between total cost and percent rejected. So now notice that when we run the report for the extra resources, when we ran the model and ran the simulation and got the report for extra resources, the report wasn't very different. So it occurred to me that what we forgot to do is to add to the set of resources. And so we had the set of product 1, 2, 3 resources, and when we introduce additional resources that are meant to do the new sales or new tech job, so we added Larry, Mo, Carly, and Herman, we did not add them to the set. And so even though we changed the variable because they're not in the set that are used, right? So here we're using this set, and also later, right here when we seize the tech, we also seize from the set. They're not really available because, as you can see, these people, Larry, Mo, Carly, and Herman, they need to be added to the set of products. So when you click on in basic process set, that's where our resources are. This is where the product set is. We still have those old set of resources. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we add for product 1, we had Larry, so we need to add Larry there. And so that's now improves this, and we have 6 members. And for product 2, we need to add Mo. And so we got Mo there. And then for product 3, we need to add Curly. So we're gonna add Curly. And then also we need to add Herman to all 3 of them. So I'm gonna add Herman to all 3 of them. So I'm going back into product 1 and adding Herman, which I could have done right away as I was adding Larry. So now I'm adding Herman here, adding Herman to product 2 set. Because Herman can do all 3, or Herman represents the tag people for all different types. So we added that to we added Herman to all 3 products. And now that we did that, we can run this, and this will create a quite difference. So yes, let's see the result. And so I can go back in to my user specified outputs and look at my output. And as you can see, the percent rejected is much more much lower than what we had before for model 5.3 without the extra resources. But before, because I forgot to add that to the product 1, product 2, and product 3 sets of resources, they weren't really engaged. So now that shows to you, right, that we did some of these changes, and of course, you can see the cost. So now it finishes lecture 16,